There's a pattern that plays out in garden centers every April, and if you've been gardening for a while, you already know it. You walk in, you see the wall of color, you pick out the annuals and the pretty flowering containers, and you bring them home with genuine hope. By late July, half of them are gone. By August, you're looking at dead stems and empty pots wondering why it keeps happening. Here's the honest answer. The plants that fill most garden centers aren't designed to last. They're designed to bloom hard, look spectacular in the buying moment, and finish their life cycle by the end of the season. And then you start over. Every year. Same money, same work, same disappointing August. The plants I want to walk you through today work differently. Every one of them is a true perennial. You plant it once, you place it in a container you like, and it comes back next spring on its own. No replacing, no guessing, no starting over. Over several years, the math works dramatically in your favor. One plant becomes 2 through division. 2 becomes 4. The original $20 container purchase stops being an annual expense and starts becoming an investment that compounds every season. That's the difference between gardening as consumption and gardening as accumulation. Before we go into specific plants, one piece of honest advice that changes everything about container perennials, and almost nobody tells new container gardeners this. When you grow a perennial in a pot, the roots are exposed to winter cold from all sides, not just from above like ground planting. That means container perennials typically survive about 1 to 2 USDA zones less hardy than the same plant grown in the ground. If a plant is rated hardy to zone 5 in the ground, treat it as zone 6 or 7 when you put it in a container. Either choose plants rated colder than your climate actually is, or move containers to a sheltered spot before the first hard freeze. This single piece of information prevents more winter loss than any amount of fertilizer or soil amendment ever could. Keep it in mind as we go. Let's start with the drought warriors, because these are the plants that earn their place on any patio where you're tired of carrying watering cans. Sedum is first, and specifically the upright varieties like autumn fire, matrona, and dragon's blood. Sedum stores water inside its own leaves, the way a succulent does, which means it doesn't depend on you remembering to water it. Established sedum in a container can go 6 to 8 weeks with no watering and still bounce back cleanly. Try that with anything else in your container garden and see what happens. The trick most gardeners miss with sedum is counterintuitive. Don't feed it. Don't amend the soil with rich compost or synthetic fertilizer. Sedum planted in rich soil grows tall, floppy, and falls apart by August. Sedum planted in lean, almost poor soil stays compact, vividly colored, and holds its structure through fall and into winter. Autumn fire is my go-to for containers because it produces deep copper-pink flower heads from September into November, standing upright without flopping. Dragon's blood is the low-growing variety with crimson foliage that intensifies as temperatures drop. Matrona is tall and architectural with burgundy stems that look sculpted. All three are hardy through zones 3 to 9, which covers almost every American and most European gardeners. Water it deeply when you first plant, then back off to once every 2 to 3 weeks through summer, and stop entirely by mid-fall. The reward is the best fall color display in your container garden. Lavender is the second drought specialist, but the one most often killed in containers. And the reason it dies isn't cold. It isn't neglect. It's the soil mix people use. Lavender evolved on rocky Mediterranean hillsides with almost no soil nutrition and near zero moisture retention. Standard moisture-holding potting mix is the single biggest killer of container lavender. Here's the fix. Mix 1/3 coarse perlite or horticultural grit into your potting soil before planting. Use a container with at least 3 drainage holes. Skip the saucer underneath, because lavender roots will rot if they sit in pooled water. Once you get the drainage right, lavender becomes one of the most trouble-free perennials you can grow. For cold climates through zone 5, Hidcote is the toughest English variety. For hot and humid conditions in the American South or Gulf regions, Phenomenal is the one that actually survives summer. For fragrance, Grosso produces the highest essential oil content and blooms continuously from early summer into fall. Never fertilize container lavender. The plant produces more intense scent, better color, and tighter form when it's slightly hungry. This is a plant where neglect is the correct technique, not a mistake. Russian sage is third. Once it roots in, Russian sage blooms continuously from July through October. That's 4 months of blue-purple flowers on silvery white stems, which is more bloom time than almost any other perennial at the same price point. Deer avoid it. Pests ignore it. The aromatic foliage actually repels some biting insects. And even after blooming ends, the silver stems provide real winter structure in a container when everything else on your patio looks bare. Hardy in zones 4 through 9, Russian sage needs exactly 1 maintenance task per year. Cut it back to 6 inches in late February or early March. That's it. 30 seconds of work, and it comes back fuller the following season. Here's something most gardening content misses. Russian sage actually looks better in a container than it does in the ground. The contained root system produces more upright, compact growth than the sprawling habit it develops in open soil. You're not compromising this plant by putting it in a pot. You're improving its form. Hens and chicks is fourth, and this is the only plant on this list that actively multiplies itself for you without being asked. The mother rosette, called the hen, continuously produces smaller rosettes around her edges. Those are the chicks, and each one is a genetically complete, fully independent plant. You pull a chick off with your fingers, press it into fresh soil in a small container, and it establishes without any special treatment. Over a few seasons, one original hen has produced enough offspring to fill several containers. Cobweb sempervivum has fine white threads stretched across each rosette that look like delicate spider webs and stop people mid-step. Red beauty transitions from green to deep burgundy through fall, peaking in November. Pacific blue ice produces blue-gray rosettes that look almost artificial. Hardy through zones 3 to 8, these plants evolved on alpine ridges in the Swiss Alps and the Carpathians. Your container, even a neglected one, is genuinely luxurious compared to where they came from. They thrive in containers as shallow as 4 inches deep, which makes them ideal for windowsill planters, wall pockets, and small balconies where deeper pots aren't practical. Lamb's ear is the fifth, and this is the plant I want to spend an extra moment on, because it does something in a container garden that almost nothing else does. It gets more beautiful the less you do to it. Lamb's ear originated on rocky, sun-baked hillsides across Turkey and Iran. Those silvery white hairs covering every leaf aren't decorative. They're a survival system. They reflect intense sunlight to keep the leaf from overheating, and they trap a thin layer of dry air against the leaf surface to slow moisture loss. When you overwater lamb's ear, those hairs flatten, trap moisture instead of air, and the plant rots from the outside in. When you underwater it, the hairs stay upright, stay silver, and the plant becomes more striking with every week of drought. Big Ears produces the largest foliage, up to 6 inches long. Helen von Stein rarely flowers, which means all the plant's energy goes into the silver leaves. Hardy through zones 4 to 8. Put lamb's ear next to almost any other plant in a container, and people reach out to touch it without thinking. That tactile quality, combined with the silver color, makes it one of the most commented on plants in any patio garden. And you achieve all of that by watering it less than anything else you own. That first group handles heat, drought, and neglect almost as a default setting. The next group is different. These are plants that earn their place through long bloom periods, vivid foliage, or working well in the shady spots where most gardeners assume nothing interesting will grow. They ask for slightly more attention than the drought specialists, but what they give back in color and structure is dramatic. Catmint Walker's Low is the sixth, and this one does something most flowering perennials cannot match. It blooms for roughly 5 months straight in a container, from May well into October in most climates. continuous clouds of blue-purple flowers arching over gray-green aromatic foliage. Butterflies are strongly attracted, and the scent of the leaves when brushed is unpleasant enough to most biting insects that it acts as a mild natural pest deterrent around seating areas. Here's the trick that doubles the value of this plant. When the first flush of flowers starts to look tired in midsummer, usually July, cut the entire plant back by half. It looks severe for about 10 days, then rebounds with a second flush of bloom that's often heavier than the first. Most gardeners skip that midsummer cut and lose 6 to 8 weeks of color every summer without realizing why. Hardy in zones 3 through 8, Walker's Low needs water only once a week once established, even during peak summer heat. Compare it directly to petunias, which are the most commonly purchased container flower in America. Petunias need deadheading every few days, weekly feeding, and complete replacement every year. Catmint needs 1 trim per season, no fertilizer, and comes back stronger for years. The difference adds up quickly. Hosta is the 7th, and I want to push back gently on a common assumption. Hostas are widely grown in the ground, but they actually perform better in containers. Not equally, better. The reason is specific. Slugs are the primary destroyer of hosta foliage in ground plantings. A container lifts the plant off the ground and makes it much harder for slugs to reach. Drainage is the second factor. Hostas rot in heavy, poorly draining ground soil, but a properly mixed container drains exactly right. The third factor is portability. You move them to the best display location in summer and to a sheltered spot before hard freeze in fall. Sum and Substance produces enormous chartreuse gold leaves up to 18 inches across that glow in shade like they're lit from inside. Halcyon has powder blue foliage that's naturally slug-resistant and stays clean all season. Patriot has deep green leaves with crisp white margins that look hand-painted. Hardy through zones 3 to 9. In cold zones 3 through 5, move containers against a protected wall or into an unheated garage before the worst of winter. In hot zones 8 and 9, morning sun only with afternoon shade to keep the foliage from scorching. A container hosta doesn't need to be replaced, ever. It divides naturally every few years, and each division goes into a fresh container. I have container hostas entering their 12th year, and the original single plant has produced enough divisions to fill 8 pots. That's the math of perennials working in your favor. Heuchera, also called coral bells, is the 8th. This plant exists in burgundy, silver, lime green, caramel, amber, orange, and near black, which is more color range than most flowering plants, and that color is present from the moment the plant breaks dormancy in spring until the first hard freeze, or year-round in mild zones where it stays evergreen. You're not waiting for bloom season. The plant is the color. Palace purple produces deep burgundy leaves that appear almost black in certain light. Lime Ricky is electric chartreuse that lights up shady corners the way no other plant can. Caramel produces warm amber-orange tones that shift gradually through the season. Hardy through zones 4 to 9. Here's the specific correction most people need with heuchera. They plant it in deep shade because they've heard it's a shade plant, and then wonder why the color goes muddy. Heuchera produces its most intense foliage color in bright indirect light or 2 to 3 hours of gentle morning sun, not deep shade. The deeper the shade, the more washed out the color becomes. Move your heuchera to where it catches morning light, and the color intensity changes visibly within about 2 weeks. That single placement adjustment makes more difference than any fertilizer, any amendment, or any other intervention. Japanese painted fern is the 9th. This is the plant that stops people mid-step and makes them ask what it is. Silver and burgundy fronds that look like someone painted each one by hand, but the coloring is completely natural and requires zero intervention. It adds a metallic, almost luminous quality to shade containers that no other plant can produce. Burgundy lace has the most pronounced purple tones of any variety, and it's the most dramatic option for containers. Ghost is nearly pure silver, almost glowing in deep shade, and one of the most visually striking foliage plants available at any price point. The classic pictum, silver gray with a burgundy midrib down each frond, has been the benchmark variety in American and European nurseries for decades. Hardy through zones 3 to 8, it dies back completely in winter and returns reliably in spring. One specific detail most people get wrong. Do not cut back the old fronds in fall. Leave them standing through winter. They provide natural insulation for the crown through hard freezes. Remove them only in early spring, when you see fresh new growth emerging from the base. Compared to a standard green fern in a container, Japanese painted fern looks like it came from a professional designer's arrangement, and the care requirements are genuinely identical. If you're growing a fern in a pot, grow the one that earns its space every day. It sits on your porch. Bergenia winterglow is the 10th, and this is the plant that quietly proves container gardening doesn't stop when summer ends. While every other perennial on your patio goes dormant, Bergenia is changing color, holding structure, and preparing to flower before winter is even finished. In spring, it produces clusters of pink flowers before almost anything else has broken dormancy, often while there's still frost on the ground in the morning. Through summer, its thick, glossy leaves provide bold structure. In fall, those same leaves transition to deep burgundy red as temperatures drop. And through winter, the evergreen foliage holds its form and color, while every other container around it looks empty and forgotten. Hardy through zones 3 to 8, it tolerates deep shade, drought, poor soil, and hard freezes once established. In the coldest zones, the winter color display is actually at its most dramatic, because the coldest temperatures produce the deepest burgundy tones. I have Bergenia containers that haven't been fertilized since planting and are watered only when I remember, which in winter means almost never. Every spring, they flower before I've thought about opening any other container for the season. That's the level of reliability this plant delivers, and very few perennials can match it. The final group of plants are the ones I'd build a container garden around if I was starting from scratch tomorrow. They bloom for months, they feed wildlife, they hold structure across all 4 seasons, and they reward you more every year you keep them. Black-eyed Susan is the 11th, and specifically the variety called Goldsturm, which is the benchmark cultivar for container use. It blooms from July straight through October, produces 80 to well over 100 simultaneous flowers at peak, and attracts goldfinches directly to your patio when the seed heads ripen in late summer. One mature plant, in a decent-sized container, creates a mass of golden yellow against dark brown centers that almost nothing else can match at the same price point. Goldsturm is reliable, compact enough for containers, and award-winning. Prairie Sun has yellow petals with green centers instead of brown, which is a fresher, more modern look. Cherry Brandy produces unusual copper-orange tones that stand out completely from standard yellow varieties. Hardy through zones 3 to 9. Here's the performance detail most people miss. Black-eyed Susan performs better in its 2nd and 3rd year than as a new planting. The root system strengthens over winter and produces more flowering stems with each successive season. What you buy this spring will be more impressive next summer, and even more impressive the summer after that. Leave the seed heads standing through fall and winter. Goldfinches, chickadees, and housefinches feed on them actively from October into February. Your container becomes a working bird feeding station that costs nothing to run once the plant is established. Daylily is the 12th, and the math on this plant is worth understanding. Each individual flower lasts exactly 1 day. But each stem produces 30 to 50 buds, and each plant produces multiple stems. That mathematical structure gives you continuous color for months from a plant that asks for almost nothing after the 1st year. Stella d'Oro is the gold standard for containers. It's compact, it reblooms from spring through frost, and it's reliable across nearly every American and European climate. Happy Returns is a pale yellow with slightly better heat tolerance in the south. Purple de Oro delivers the same compact, dependable habit in deep purple. Hardy through zones 3 to 9, with evergreen varieties holding foliage year-round in the warmest zones. Daylilies multiply naturally every 3 to 4 years. You simply separate the clump into 2 or 3, pot up the divisions in fresh soil, and you've turned one purchase into several. That's the pattern that keeps paying off, year after year, without you spending another dollar. Ornamental grass is the 13th, and I'm grouping 3 excellent container varieties together because they all do the same essential job. They bring movement, they bring sound when the wind passes through them, and they hold 4-season structure that almost no other container plant can match. Karl Forster, feather reed grass stands narrow and upright at 4 to 5 feet, which is why it won Perennial Plant of the Year recognition. It's the most architectural grass available for containers. Morning Light Miscanthus has fine silver-edged leaves with a graceful arching form and pink plumes in fall. Blue fescue forms compact blue-gray mounds only 10 to 12 inches tall, perfect for smaller containers and mixed arrangements. Karl Forster is hardy through zones 4 to 9, Morning Light through zones 5 to 9, and Blue Fescue through zones 4 to 8. The complete annual maintenance is cutting the grass back to 4 to 6 inches in late February. One task, 5 minutes, one time per year. In return, you get spring green vertical structure, summer plumes, golden fall color, and standing architectural form through winter when nothing else looks intentional in a container. Coneflower, or echinacea, is the 14th. This is a native plant across much of North America, with a documented medicinal history going back centuries, a bloom period of 4 full months, and seed heads that feed birds through the winter. Few plants on this list do as much work for your yard as this one does. Magnus Purple is the classic and most reliable variety, with larger flower heads than the wild species and a more upright habit. White Swan is pure white with orange centers and handles slightly more shade than purple varieties. Hot Papaya produces double orange-red flowers and is the most dramatic modern variety available. Hardy through zones 3 to 9. In colder zones, place the container against a protected south-facing wall during the worst of winter. Coneflower also self-seeds into surrounding containers, which means free volunteer plants show up every year in pots nearby. Leave the seed heads standing through fall and winter. The same birds that feed on black-eyed Susan seed heads come to coneflower for the same reason. Hellebore is the 15th, and it's the plant that does something almost nothing else on this list can do. It blooms in the snow. While every other container perennial is dormant, hellebore is producing flowers. The bloom period runs from December through April, depending on your climate, which is the longest flowering window of any perennial I know. Flowers come in white, pink, burgundy, yellow, and near black, and the evergreen foliage provides 12-month structure regardless of whether the plant is blooming. The Ice and Roses series is the one I'd specifically recommend for container use, because those varieties hold their flowers upright rather than letting them nod toward the ground the way some older hellebore cultivars do. Ice and Roses. Red produces deep burgundy flowers from December into March. Wedding Party has pure white double flowers from January into April. Penny's Pink delivers soft pink with darker veining, and it's one of the most elegant varieties on the market. Hardy through zones 4 to 9. In the coldest zones, move the container to a protected location. In warmer zones, the bloom season stretches even longer. Most gardeners spend winter looking at empty containers. Hellebore gardeners spend winter looking at flowers. That difference costs exactly the same amount of effort. Those are the 15 plants. Any one of them is a solid choice. A mix of 5 or 6 from different groups gives you a container garden that holds color and structure across all 4 seasons. But there are 3 specific mistakes that will kill any plant on this list, regardless of how well you choose, and these are worth more than any single variety recommendation. The first is drainage. The single biggest killer of container perennials across the United States and Europe is not underwatering. It's overwatering combined with poor drainage. Roots sitting in waterlogged soil cannot access oxygen. They suffocate and rot, and by the time you see damage in the leaves, the plant is already past saving. Every container needs at least 3 half-inch drainage holes. Adding a 2-inch layer of coarse gravel at the base of the pot before you add soil improves drainage further. Skip the saucer underneath for any drought-tolerant plant. Water should visibly drain from the bottom of the container within about 15 to 20 seconds of watering. If it pools longer than that, your mix is too dense, and your roots are already under stress. The second is container size. A perennial in a 10-inch container needs water every day or two in summer. The same plant in a 16-inch container needs water every 3 to 4 days. The same plant in a 24-inch container needs water once or twice a week. Size also matters dramatically in winter. Small containers freeze solid from edge to center, which destroys roots. Larger containers have enough thermal mass to buffer roots through temperatures that would kill them in a smaller pot. For anything on this list, 16-inch diameter is the minimum I'd use. Larger is better for both summer ease and winter survival. This is why earlier I said container perennials survive 1 to 2 zones less hardy than their ground rating. Small containers make that gap even wider. Bigger pots close it. The third is the soil mix. Don't use standard garden soil in containers because it compacts and drains poorly. Don't use the cheapest bagged potting mix either, because it's usually mostly bark and holds too much moisture. The recipe that actually works for perennials is 50% quality potting mix, 30% coarse perlite, and 20% compost. That blend drains well, holds just enough moisture, and feeds the plant slowly through the season without synthetic fertilizer. Every spring, scrape off the top 2 inches of old soil and replace it with fresh compost mixed with a bit of slow-release granular fertilizer. 10 minutes per container, once a year. That's the complete annual soil maintenance for every plant on this list. Here's the honest picture. You can buy any perennial from this list, plant it in a 10-inch pot with dense soil and a saucer underneath, and watch it fail. Or you can pick any plant from this list, give it a 16-inch container with good drainage and the right soil mix, and watch it come back stronger every single year for a decade. The difference between those two outcomes has almost nothing to do with the plant. It has everything to do with those 3 details. Get them right, and perennial container gardening becomes one of the most rewarding, compounding, low-effort hobbies in the garden. Start with 2 or 3 plants that suit your light conditions and climate. A sunny patio gets sedum, lavender, and catmint. A shady porch gets hosta, heuchera, and Japanese painted fern. A cold zone focused on winter interest gets bergenia, hellebore, and ornamental grass. Whichever combination you choose, put them in properly sized containers with the right mix from day 1. 3 years from now, you'll have more plants than you started with, more color than you expected, and almost no annual replacement costs. If any of this was useful to you today, type "grow" in the comments and hit the like button. It helps the channel reach more gardeners who are ready to stop replacing annuals every year and start building a container garden that actually lasts. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.